Every house, every king, and every battle has its own truth. But there are stories older than crowns, darker than the night, and more dangerous than any blade. They were never written in books. They were whispered to fire, to the trees, and to the dead gods. And today, we dare to uncover one of them. The moon hung pale above the jagged peaks of the mountains of the moon, its light spilling like cold milk over the ancient stones of the Arryn. Far below, the Vale slept in its silver mist, a quiet sea of cloud and shadow. Inside the castle's white walls, where the air was thin and the nights were long, a frail boy sat upon a high chair carved with the falcon of House Arryn. His name was Robert Arryn, Lord of the Arryn, Warden of the East, though few who looked at him saw a lord, and fewer still saw a warrior. He was 13, slight as a reed, his chest forever trembling with fits that seized him without warning. His hands were pale and delicate, his hair the color of honey in the morning sun. Even now, wrapped in furs before the hearth, he shivered. The servants whispered that the mountain air would kill him before his manhood did. Yet, on this night, something restless stirred in the boy's heart. He had heard it earlier that day, rumors from the bloody gate. The mountain clans were raiding again, bold as crows. A merchant's train had been attacked on the east road, and a knight of House Hunter was missing, taken captive in the passes. Lord Petter Baelish, his protector and the Lord Paramount of the Vale, had laughed it off as mountain mischief, promising to send men to deal with it soon enough. But Robert saw the way Sir Lyn Corbray's jaw tightened when Baelish spoke. He saw the way the Vale knights exchanged glances, proud men bound by duty, ashamed that their lordling hid behind marble and sky. That night, when the hall emptied and only the firelight remained, Robert spoke softly to Maester Coleman. "They think me weak," he said. "Even Sir Lyn, even Lord Petter, they think I would die if I so much as breathed the mountain air." The maester's face was kind, lined by years of patient care. "You are not weak, my lord. You are cautious, and there is wisdom in caution." But Robert shook his head, his voice trembling not from illness, but from something fiercer, pride. "Falcons do not live in cages. I am the falcon. I must fly." The maester hesitated. "My lord, the clans are dangerous. Even seasoned knights fall in those passes." "I am Lord of the Vale," Robert said quietly, as if repeating a truth he had long forgotten. "And I will prove it." Before dawn, the castle stirred. Word spread that the young lord had ordered his horse saddled and his knights readied. Petter Baelish arrived in the courtyard wrapped in silken fur, a smile playing at his lips. "My sweet Robert," he purred, "are we hunting mountain goats this morning? Or are we merely seeking to give Maester Coleman another heart attack?" Robert stood beside his white pony, his small frame straightened by sheer will. "The clans have taken a knight of the Vale," he said. "I will not hide while my people suffer." For a moment, Baelish simply stared. Then, with a sigh that seemed half amusement, half disbelief, he said, "And what would your lady mother say if she could see her little falcon flying into danger?" The name of Lysa Arryn hung heavy in the cold air. The boy's lips quivered, but he did not look away. "She would tell me to be brave," he whispered, "and I will be." A murmur rippled through the assembled knights, astonishment, perhaps even a touch of respect. Sir Lyn Corbray stepped forward, his sharp face unreadable. "If our lord wishes to ride, then ride he shall. The clans will not know what fear is until they see the Falcon Lord upon the heights." And so it was decided. By the time the sun broke over the mountains, a small company of 20 riders wound their way down the narrow path from the Arryn. The wind howled between the cliffs, carrying the sound of hooves and the jingle of steel. Robert rode among them, cloaked in blue and white, his banner streaming above, a white falcon soaring upon a sky of blue. The road twisted endlessly downward. To their left, the cliffs plunged into fog. To their right, the peaks towered like the bones of the gods. Every turn seemed to whisper danger. Yet Robert's eyes gleamed with determination. "Are you well, my lord?" Sir Lyn asked once, noticing how tightly the boy gripped his reins. Robert nodded. "The air is thinner here, but I like it. It feels alive." As they descended into the high valleys, the talk among the men turned grim. They spoke of the clans, the burned men, the stone crows, the sons of the mist, each more savage than the last. They raided for food, for gold, for blood. And though the veil had crushed them a dozen times, they always returned, ghosts of the mountains that refused to die. That night, they camped by a stream where the moonlight shone silver on the rocks. The knights sang old songs of the Vale, and the flames cast long shadows that danced like phantoms. Robert sat apart, staring into the fire, his mind full of ghosts, his mother's voice, his father's stories, the weight of a name that seemed too heavy for his frail shoulders. "Tomorrow," Sir Lyn said as he sat beside him, polishing his blade, "we ride to the foothills. If the clans have taken Sir Jareth Hunter, they will demand ransom, or worse. Do not be afraid, my lord. Stay behind me, and you'll come to no harm." Robert looked up at the knight's gleaming sword, then at his own trembling hands. "And if I wish to stand beside you?" Sir Lyn's eyes flicked toward him, startled. Then, slowly, he smiled, a rare, fierce thing. "Then, my lord, you'd make a better Arryn than any man alive." The fire crackled, the wind moaned, and the boy's heart swelled with something he had never known before. Not fear, not sickness, but the first fragile beating of courage. In the darkness above, a falcon cried. The dawn came thin and cold, spilling pale gold across the narrow valley. The men of the Vale stirred among the ashes of their campfires, strapping on mail and tightening saddle girths, while their breath steamed in the air. Robert Arryn watched them, silent and still, his small frame cloaked in blue wool and fur. The chill bit through his gloves, but he did not flinch. He was among knights and men-at-arms now, and he would not be seen as a child. "Eat something, my lord," Maester Coleman urged, pressing a wooden bowl of oats into his hands. Robert managed a few bites, though his stomach churned with excitement and fear. His thoughts were on the road ahead, the twisting, treacherous path that led into the heart of the Mountains of the Moon. Beyond those cliffs lay the wild passes where the clans hid like wolves. He had seen them only from afar before, dark shapes on the ridges, their war cries echoing like thunder, but today he would face them. Sir Lyn Corbray approached astride his gray stallion, armor polished and sword at his hip. The famed blade Lady Forlorn glimmered faintly even in the weak sunlight. "The scouts report tracks ahead," he said to the company. 24, maybe more. We'll move at a trot until we reach the ridge." His cold gray eyes fell on Robert. "Stay close to me, my lord. The mountain winds can turn even the surest rider into a corpse." Robert nodded, drawing his cloak tighter. By mid-morning, they were climbing once more, winding between cliffs so steep that only a ribbon of sky could be seen above. The silence pressed in heavy, broken only by the creak of leather and the snort of horses. It was a cruel and ancient land. Sharp stones, narrow paths, and the ever-present feeling that unseen eyes were watching. The boy could feel them. Somewhere beyond the rocks, the clansmen lurked. The thought should have frightened him, but instead it sharpened him. They will not whisper that Robert Arryn hides behind walls today, he thought. They will see me ride. Suddenly a cry rang out, a hawk's scream echoing across the peaks. The lead rider raised his hand. "Hold!" Every man froze. Then came the whistle, thin, deadly, and an arrow hissed through the air, striking the rocks beside Sir Lyn's horse. Another followed, then another. "Ambush!" shouted one of the knights. From the ridges above, figures poured forth. The burned men, their faces scarred and blackened, their armor patchwork and crude. They screamed their war cries, raining arrows and stones down upon the Vale riders. "Shields!" Sir Lyn roared, drawing Lady Forlorn. The men formed up, shields raised, as the arrows clattered like rain on steel. Horses shrieked, men cursed, and the mountain came alive with chaos. Robert's heart pounded. His pony reared, nearly unseating him. Maester Coleman cried out, trying to pull him back to cover, but Robert's gaze was fixed on the ridges where the clansmen stood. Among them, he saw a man tall as an oak, wearing a cloak of wolf pelts and carrying a curved axe. His eyes locked on Robert, and the boy felt as if the world itself narrowed to that one savage glare. Then the clansmen charged. The first wave struck hard, crashing against the Vale Knights like a storm. Steel clashed, men shouted, blood spattered the stones. Sir Lyn was everywhere at once, his blade flashing silver as he cut down foes with deadly precision. But there were too many. They swarmed from both sides, howling like beasts. "Back to the rocks," Sir Lyn ordered. "Form a wedge." Robert felt the press of bodies, the heat of battle all around him. A man lunged at him, filthy, wild-eyed, his axe raised high. The boy froze, unable to breathe. But before the blow could fall, a knight slammed into the clansman, driving a sword through his chest. The body fell at Robert's feet, eyes still wide with fury. The smell of blood filled the air. The world was noise and motion, yet in that moment, something shifted inside him. Fear did not vanish. It hardened, like iron under flame. He could not flee. He was the lord of the Eyrie, and his men were dying for him. "Sir Lyn," he shouted, his voice breaking through the din. "The ridge above us! They're circling!" Corbray turned sharply, following his gaze. Indeed, more shapes were moving across the high path, cutting off their escape. "You've good eyes, my lord," the knight said grimly. "Hold fast." But the mountain had its own cruel designs. A sudden rumble shook the ground, loose stones tumbling from the slope above. Then, with a thunderous crack, part of the ridge gave way, collapsing down the path. Men and horses were swept aside, screams echoing through the pass. Dust filled the air like smoke. When the world cleared, Robert found himself alone beside the shattered remains of the trail. The knights were scattered. Maester Coleman lay pinned beneath a fallen horse, moaning faintly. Sir Lyn was nowhere to be seen. Panic clawed at Robert's chest. The sounds of battle still echoed down the slope, but faint now, distant. He could see movement among the rocks, clansmen searching, calling to one another in guttural voices. He crept toward the maester, his legs trembling. "Coleman, can you move?" The old man coughed weakly. "Go. Run, my lord. They'll take you." "No," Robert said, voice shaking. "I will not leave you." But there was no time. The scrape of boots on stone told him the clansmen were near. He dragged himself behind a fallen boulder, clutching the small dagger at his belt. It was barely more than a child's toy, but it was all he had. Two men appeared at the bend, filthy and armed with spears. They spoke in their harsh mountain tongue, laughing as they saw the wreckage. One kicked at the Maester's body, then bent to strip his pouch. The other turned, and his eyes met Robert's. The boy didn't think. He lunged, driving the dagger forward with all his strength. The blade struck the man's thigh. He howled, swinging his spear wildly. Robert ducked beneath the blow and stumbled back, the dagger slick with blood. The second clansman roared, charging toward him, but then a horn sounded in the distance, a clear, piercing note that echoed across the cliffs. "The knights!" Robert gasped. The clansmen hesitated, fear flashing in their eyes. Then they turned and fled into the mist, vanishing as swiftly as they'd come. Moments later, Sir Lyn Corbray rode through the haze with a dozen men, their banners torn but their spirits unbroken. When he saw the boy standing amid the stones, dagger in hand, his face went still. "7 hells," he murmured. "You're alive." Robert nodded, breath ragged. "They ran," he said softly. When they heard the horn, Sir Lyn dismounted, clasping the boy's shoulder. "No," he said, his tone low but fierce. "They ran because they saw you standing." The men gathered the wounded, and by sunset they made camp once more. Maester Coleman lived, though his leg was broken. Around the fire, the knights spoke in hushed tones of their young lord, the frail boy who had not fled, who had struck a clansman himself. Robert said little. He stared into the flames, feeling the ache in his arms, the raw sting of smoke in his lungs. But beneath the pain, there was something else, something he had never known before, the steady pulse of pride. He was still trembling, yes, but not from sickness. This time, it was from the fire that had finally awoken within him. Night draped itself over the mountains, cold and starless. The Vale men huddled close to the fire, their faces drawn and weary, their armor dented and dark with blood. The wind hissed through the rocks like a whispering ghost. Every so often, a horse snorted or a wounded man groaned, and each sound seemed to echo far too loudly in the stillness. Robert Arryn sat apart from them on a low stone, his cloak drawn tight around his shoulders. He had washed the blood from his hands, yet he could still see the faint stain beneath his nails. The image would not leave him, the flash of the clansman's eyes, the sound of the dagger sinking in, the moment when fear turned to something fiercer, harder. It haunted him, yet also filled him with an unfamiliar strength. Sir Lyn Corbray approached, the glow of the campfire shining against his polished breastplate. "You should rest, my lord," he said, his tone softened from the usual edge it bore. "We've all had enough for one day." Robert looked up, his eyes wide and sleepless. "Will they come again?" "They will not," Sir Lyn replied. "They took their dead and fled north. These savages strike from shadow, never twice in the same place. Tomorrow we'll reach the foothills and find Sir Jareth Hunter, if he yet lives." Robert hesitated. "You think he might not?" The knight's jaw tightened. "The clans seldom take prisoners for long, but if they do, we'll find him." He turned to leave, but Robert's voice stopped him. "Sir Lyn," he said quietly, "today I saw fear in their eyes, not just of your sword, but of me." "Why?" Corbray's expression softened, almost into a smile. "Because you stood," he said. "Most boys of your age, and half the men I've known, would have run, but you faced them. That is a rare thing in these mountains." Robert's gaze dropped to the dagger lying across his knees. "I didn't mean to kill him." "Few ever do," Sir Lyn murmured, "but you did what was needed. That is what a lord must do." He left the boy then, and Robert sat long into the night, staring into the embers. When at last sleep claimed him, it was filled with dreams of wings and falling, of the Eyrie rising like a pale beacon above the clouds. By dawn, they were on the move again, following the mountain stream downward into a narrow gorge. The sun was pale behind the mist, and the air sharp with frost. The scouts rode ahead, eyes searching the heights for movement. Every sound seemed dangerous here, the crack of a pebble, the caw of a crow. Maester Coleman rode in a cart, his leg bound and splinted, yet his spirit remained unbroken. "The mountain will test you, my lord," he told Robert as they rode side by side. "It tests all who dwell in its shadow, but those who endure its cruelty emerge tempered as steel." Robert looked up at the looming cliffs. "Then I shall be steel before I return home." The maester smiled faintly. "Your mother would be proud to hear you speak so." A strange silence followed that name. Lysa Tully, Lady Arryn, his mother. Her ghost still ruled the Eyrie more than any living soul. Robert wondered what she would think if she saw him now, no longer the sickly boy in her arms, but a rider of the high roads. He missed her still, though his memories of her had grown soft and blurred with time. The path wound lower as the day stretched on, and soon the trees began to appear, scraggly birches clinging to the rock. When they came upon a stretch of flattened grass and broken shields, Sir Lynn called for a halt. "This was a fight," he said, dismounting. "Not long ago." Robert followed, peering at the ground. Blood had dried in the soil. Bits of torn cloth fluttered in the wind, a hunter's green and brown. "Sir Jareth?" he asked. "Perhaps," Corbray said grimly. "Or his captors." One of the men found a trail of footprints leading deeper into the gorge, toward a narrow fissure in the rock. Sir Lynn ordered 5 knights to follow, leaving the rest to guard the boy. Robert protested, but the knight silenced him with a look. "Courage is not the same as foolishness," he said. "Stay here." They waited long hours. The sky darkened again, the mist thickening until the cliffs seemed to close in around them. Robert's unease grew with every passing moment. The wind carried strange sounds, faint voices perhaps, or the shifting of stones. Then came the shout, "To arms! They're upon us!" Out of the fog burst shadows, men with painted faces, wielding crude axes and short spears. Not the burned men this time, but the stone crows, fierce and silent. They fell upon the Vale riders like a wave. Steel clashed once more. Horses reared, Robert's ears filled with screams. He could not see Sir Lynn or the others, only the flash of blades and the crush of bodies. His pony bolted, hooves pounding over rock. He fought to control it, pulling hard on the reins, until at last the beast stumbled to a halt beside a narrow crevice in the mountainside. The sounds of battle were fading now, swallowed by the mist. Robert dismounted, gasping, his legs weak. Then, faintly, he heard something. A cry for help, distant and desperate. He followed it, squeezing through the gap in the rocks. The air inside was damp and cold, the passage lit only by the thin glow of daylight from behind. The sound came again, a man's voice, weak but alive. "Who's there?" Robert called. "Hunter. Sir Jareth Hunter," came the rasping reply. He pushed forward and found the knight lying half-conscious in the dark, his face bruised, his armor shattered. He had been bound with rough rope, his sword broken beside him. "Seven, save us," Robert breathed. "You live." The man's eyes fluttered open. "They left me for dead. The clans took my squire and fled north." Robert drew his dagger again and cut the ropes. "You must stand. My men are fighting not far from here." Hunter groaned but managed to rise, leaning heavily on the boy's shoulder. Together they stumbled from the crevice and into the gray light. But what greeted them was not rescue. It was peril. A lone clansman stood ahead, watching them. His hair was long and matted, his face daubed with ash. He grinned, raising his axe. Robert stepped before the wounded knight without thinking. "Run," he said. The man laughed, low and cruel, and came forward. Robert felt every muscle quiver, yet he did not move aside. The clansman swung, and the boy ducked, just barely, feeling the rush of air as the blade missed him by inches. He struck back clumsily, the dagger slicing across the man's arm. The savage howled, enraged now, but before he could strike again, a horn sounded once more, the Vale horn, closed this time. Out of the fog rode Sir Lyn Corbray and his men, cutting down the last of the ambushers with merciless steel. When they reached Robert, Sir Lyn leapt from his horse and stared at the scene. The boy, pale and shaking, standing protectively before the wounded knight. "7 above," Corbray said. "You found him." Robert could only nod, his breath coming hard. That night, they made camp near the stream again. Sir Gareth Hunter was alive, though weak, and the men were weary but victorious. Around the fire, they spoke not of their losses, but of the courage of their young lord, the frail boy who had braved the dark alone to save one of their own. Sir Lyn approached him as the stars rose. "Do you see now, my lord," he said quietly, "what it means to rule? Not to sit in marble halls, but to bleed with your men?" Robert nodded slowly. His hands trembled, yet not from fear. "I think I begin to understand." "Good," said the knight, his voice rough with pride. "Then the Vale has found its falcon after all." Above them, the night cleared at last, and a cold wind swept down from the peaks. The boy looked up to where the stars gleamed like the eyes of old gods, and for the first time in his life, he did not feel small. He felt alive, forged by the mountain's cruel fire, and ready at last to soar. Dawn broke red over the mountains of the moon, staining the snows like spilled blood. The storm of the night before had passed, leaving a hush upon the world, a stillness that felt almost sacred. Smoke curled from the dying embers of the Vale men's camp, and the smell of iron and pine drifted through the chill air. Robert Arryn awoke before the others, the memory of dreams clinging to him like mist. He had dreamed of flight, of soaring high above the eyrie, wings outstretched, his mother's voice calling from the clouds below. But the dream had ended in falling, as it always did, and he had woken with his heart pounding. Yet this morning, the fear faded quickly, replaced by resolve. He was no longer the boy who trembled at shadows. He had faced death and stood his ground. When he rose, he found Sir Lyn Corbray already awake, sharpening Lady Forlorn upon a whetstone. The knight's hair was damp with dew, his armor buckled and worn. "You should sleep while you can, my lord," he said without looking up. "The mountain does not forgive exhaustion." "I'm not tired," Robert replied. "Where will we ride today?" Corbray paused his work. "Down the east road. We'll reach the Bloody Gate by nightfall, God's willing. Once Sir Gareth can stand, we'll return to the eyrie." Robert's eyes wandered to where Sir Gareth Hunter lay, wrapped in bandages and asleep beneath his cloak. "He nearly died," the boy said softly. "Aye," Corbray murmured. "But he didn't, thanks to you." The words should have warmed Robert, but they carried a strange weight. He thought of the man he had killed, the clansman whose face haunted him still. Did courage always come with such a price? He did not know, yet he sensed this was a lesson no Meister's book could teach. When the company broke camp, the morning sun glimmered upon their helms and shields. They moved slowly through the narrow pass, wary of further ambush. The road twisted and climbed between sheer cliffs where ravens circled and croaked. From time to time, Robert glimpsed the white towers of the eyrie far above, distant and serene, as if belonging to another world. By midday, They reached the ruins of an old watchtower, long abandoned to the elements. Sir Lynn called a halt, ordering the men to rest and water their horses. Robert wandered among the stones, tracing his fingers along the weathered carvings of falcons and stars. This place guarded the Vale in the days of the Andals, Maester Coleman said, limping after him. Once, beacons burned here to warn of invaders from the west. And now? Robert asked. The Maester's gaze was somber. Now the beacons are cold, and the mountains belong to ghosts. Robert shivered, though the sun was warm. He looked toward the peaks, their crowns lost in cloud. Do you believe in ghosts, Maester? I believe the past never truly dies, Coleman replied. It lingers, in stones, in stories, in blood. The words echoed within Robert long after the Maester had returned to the others. He felt the truth of them. The ghosts of his house were many. His father, murdered in King's Landing, his mother, who had fallen through the moon door, the knights who had died defending his birthright. They all lived within him, whispering their counsel. Be brave, they said. Remember who you are. As they set off again, a change came over the air. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of rain. Clouds gathered, heavy and dark, swallowing the sun. By late afternoon, the road had grown slick beneath the horses' hooves, and the mist closed in so thick they could barely see 10 paces ahead. Storm's coming, one of the riders warned. Corbray nodded grimly. We'll shelter at Stone Hollow. It lies a mile east. But the mountain had other plans. Before they could reach the hollow, a shout rose from the rear. One of the scouts galloped forward, mud splattering his cloak. Riders! He cried. Behind us! 100, maybe more! Mountain clans again? Corbray barked. The scout's face was pale. Aye, the Sons of the Mist. Panic rippled through the line. The Sons were the most feared of all the clans, led by the half-mad chieftain Tormund Stone-Eye, a man said to worship the spirits of the mountain itself. Form up, Corbray commanded. Shields to the flanks. Protect the Lord. The thunder of hooves echoed behind them, faint at first, then rising to a deafening roar. Out of the fog they came, wild riders clad in furs, their faces streaked with ash, their axes flashing in the gloom. The Sons of the Mist charged like a storm, screaming their war cries to the darkening sky. The clash was sudden and terrible. The Vale Knights met them head-on, swords ringing against crude iron. The air filled with the scent of sweat, blood, and rain. Robert clung to his reins, heart hammering as his pony danced in panic. Stay close, my lord, shouted Sir Lynn, carving down a clansman who came too near. But the mist was thick, the world a blur of shadow and steel. Robert heard a scream, Maester Coleman's voice, and turned just in time to see a clansman seize the maester from his cart. Coleman! Robert cried, spurring his pony forward. He rode straight into the chaos, heedless of danger. The clansman dragged the maester toward the rocks, knife raised, when Robert struck. He threw himself from the saddle, colliding with the man's back. They tumbled to the ground, the dagger clattering from his grip. The clansman roared, shoving the boy aside. Robert scrambled for a weapon, his dagger again, slick with rain, and as the man rose, he drove it upward. The blade sank deep beneath the ribs. The clansman froze, gasping, then fell limp beside him. Robert stumbled to his feet, chest heaving. Maester Coleman stared at him in shock and horror, and something like awe. My lord, the maester whispered, you saved my life. Before Robert could answer, Sir Lynn appeared through the mist, blood streaking his armor. We've broken them, he said. "The bastards are fleeing east." The battle faded as swiftly as it had come. The rain began to fall in earnest now, washing the blood from the stones. The men of the Vale gathered their dead and tended to the wounded in silence. When at last they reached Stone Hollow, night had fallen. The small cave offered little comfort, but it was dry. They built a fire and set guards at the mouth. Robert sat near the flames, staring into them as the storm raged outside. "You fought well today," Sir Lyn said, sitting beside him. "You've a courage in you few expected." Robert said nothing. He could still feel the dagger in his hand, still see the life fading from the clansman's eyes. It was no dream now, no act of chance. It had been his choice. Sir Lyn saw the turmoil in his face. "Killing is never easy, nor should it be," he said, "but you did what honor demanded." Robert met his gaze, and for the first time, the boy's voice did not tremble. "Then honor is a heavy burden." "It is," the knight agreed, "and you carry it well." Outside, lightning flashed across the peaks, and the thunder rolled like the voice of the gods. The firelight danced upon Robert's pale face, and in that flickering glow, something in him changed. He was still frail, still thin and sickly, but his eyes burned bright as the falcon sigil of his house. The mountain had tested him and had not found him wanting. That night, as the storm howled and the wind tore at the rocks, the men of the Vale whispered a new name for their young lord, the Falcon of Stone Hollow, the boy who did not break. And though Robert Arryn slept little, when he did, he dreamed not of falling, but of wings spread wide above the storm, carrying him higher than fear had ever dared to follow. The storm passed before dawn, leaving the world washed clean and cold. Mist clung to the rocks like pale silk, and rivulets of water trickled down the slopes, glinting in the first gray light. When Robert Arryn stepped from the cave, the air was sharp in his lungs, each breath burning but alive. He looked down the mountain, and for the first time, the Vale lay before him in full. The green folds of forest and valley, the silver thread of the river, the glimmering specks of distant towers. It was his land, his birthright, vast and unyielding. Behind him, the camp stirred to life. The knights of the Vale moved with slow weariness, tending their horses and sharpening their blades. The battle had cost them 3 good men, and the silence of the survivors bore that weight. Maester Coleman, though limping, busied himself among the wounded, his hands steady as ever. Only Sir Lyn Corbray seemed untouched by exhaustion. He moved with the same cold, sharp purpose that defined every motion of his life. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Sir Lyn said, joining Robert on the ridge. His gray eyes followed the mists as they curled through the valleys. "From here, one can almost forget the world's ugliness." Robert nodded, though his gaze lingered on the far horizon. "Almost." The knight's mouth curved in something like approval. "You see farther than most, my lord. That's a gift you must learn to keep." Robert hesitated. "And if what I see brings no comfort?" "Then you're already becoming a true lord," Sir Lyn said, tightening his gloves. "Comfort is for those who have no duty." They rode shortly after, descending along the winding trail that led toward the Bloody Gate. The path was narrow and steep, flanked by cliffs that rose like walls on either side. Here and there, the remnants of old fortifications jutted from the stone, broken battlements, a crumbled tower, relics of wars long past. As they rode, Robert could feel the eyes of his men upon him. Their glances were quick, respectful, even cautious. He had earned something from them, something new. Not pity, not indulgence, but respect. He carried it in silence, as if it were a fragile thing that might vanish if spoken aloud. By midday, they reached a flat stretch of ground where the wind howled fiercest. Sir Lin raised his hand to halt. Ahead, the path forked, one road leading down toward the main gate, the other twisting into a narrow ravine that ran eastward. "We'll take the high road," Sir Lin decided. "The ravine's too tight, a perfect place for another ambush." But Robert's eyes had caught something. Along the ravine's edge, half buried in snow, a torn banner flapped weakly. Its colors were faded, but the sigil was clear, a white falcon on blue. "Vale men," Robert said, pointing. Sir Lin's frown deepened. "Left behind after the last raid, perhaps. Still, we'll see it." They turned into the ravine, moving slowly, the echo of hooves bouncing off the stone walls. The air grew colder as they descended, and a strange quiet settled around them. No bird song, no wind, only the steady rhythm of their mounts. Then came a sound, faint, almost lost beneath the creak of saddles, a whisper, or perhaps a moan. "Hold," Sir Lin commanded. The knights froze. Again it came from beyond a bend in the rocks, a low, broken voice calling for help. Robert's hand tightened on his reins. "Someone's alive." "Or something wishes us to think so," Sir Lin murmured. "Stay behind me." They advanced cautiously, weapons drawn. The ravine widened into a shallow basin, and there, half buried beneath rubble, lay the remains of a camp. Tents shredded by wind, ashes cold, bodies strewn among the stones. Robert dismounted, ignoring Sir Lin's warning, and hurried forward. One of the bodies moved, a man, badly wounded, crawling weakly toward them. His armor bore the sigil of House Grafton. "Gods," Robert breathed. "What happened here?" The man's eyes rolled to him, wild and glassy. "They came from the mists. The Stone Eyes men took the others. North." "North?" Sir Lin asked sharply. "How far?" The soldier coughed blood. "To the old fort, the one they call the Widow's Rise." He shuddered once, then went still. A heavy silence followed. The Widow's Rise was an ancient ruin, a fortress built before the Andals, carved into the mountain itself. The clansmen whispered that it was cursed, that no fire would burn within its walls. Sir Lin turned to Robert. "We've done our duty. The living are safe, the wounded tended. It's time we returned." Robert looked at the dead man's face, still frozen in terror. "And what of the others? The ones taken north?" "Lost," Sir Lin said simply. "We can't save everyone, my lord." Robert met his gaze, steady now. "If I'm to rule the Vale, I must try." For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then the knight exhaled slowly. "Your mother's will in you, that's plain enough. Very well, we'll ride at first light." They buried the fallen before leaving, the wind scattering snow over their makeshift graves. That night, they camped at the mouth of the ravine. The men were uneasy. No one wished to chase shadows into the cursed north, but none dared speak against their lord. Robert sat by the fire, his face lit by the flames. Maester Coleman approached quietly, leaning on his staff. "The Widow's Rise is a dangerous place, my lord. Even in the old records it is named as haunted." "Haunted or not," Robert said, "men of the Vale are held there. I will not abandon them." The Maester studied him, worry etched deep in his lined face. "You have changed, my lord. There is strength in you now, and danger too." Robert looked into the fire. "Then perhaps I was meant to find both." When dawn came, pale and cold, the Falcon Lord of the Vale rode again into the mists. His banner streamed behind him, white and blue against the gray. The road grew steeper, the rocks sharper, and soon even the sound of the wind seemed to fade, swallowed by the looming mountains. As the company climbed higher, a shape emerged through the fog, black stone rising from the earth like a jagged tooth. The Widow's Rise. It was larger than Robert had imagined, half buried in the cliffside, its towers shattered, its gates rotted with age. No birds perched on its battlements, and no sound came from within. Only a deep, endless silence, heavy as the grave. The men crossed themselves, muttering prayers. Even Sir Lyn's face was grim. Robert dismounted, drawing his dagger, the small blade that had already tasted blood. "We go in," he said quietly, and as the great shadow of the fortress swallowed them, the boy who had once trembled at every sound stepped forward without fear. For the first time, Robert Arryn led, not as a name, not as a title, but as a lord of the Vale. And though none could say what horrors waited within those black halls, all who followed him that morning would remember the moment for the rest of their days. The moment the frail boy of the Eyrie walked into legend. The Widow's Rise loomed like a wound in the mountain's flesh. Its walls, dark as old blood, were streaked with moss and centuries of rain. Time had gnawed at its battlements, but still it stood, half fortress, half tomb. The air that surrounded it was unnaturally still, as if the very wind feared to enter. Even the horses snorted uneasily and rolled their eyes at the scent of the place. Robert Arryn felt the weight of it pressing upon him as he gazed upward at the black gate. It was no marvel of stonework like the Eyrie, but a relic of an older, crueler age, built by hands that knew no mercy. Every corner seemed to hide a shadow, every shadow a watching eye. Sir Lyn Corbray dismounted, his boots sinking into the damp earth. "The clans have a taste for fear," he said quietly. "They say this place is cursed, and perhaps it is, but stone cannot harm a man. Steel and cowardice can." The men murmured agreement, though none looked eager to cross the threshold. Robert felt their unease like a current beneath his skin. He knew they followed him now because he had proven himself, but he also knew what kind of courage held them here. Grim, practical, born of loyalty more than faith. "Sir Lyn," he said, his voice steady though his hands trembled, "take 10 men. We'll enter together. If the clans still hold the fort, we will find them." "Stay with the horses, my lord," Corbray urged. "If there is danger—" Robert met his eyes. "Then I must face it. These are my people, Sir Lyn, my land." The knight studied him a moment longer, then nodded once. "As you will, my lord." The great doors groaned as they pushed them open, the hinges shrieking like dying things. The air that poured out was cold and damp, thick with the scent of rot. They stepped into a vast hall whose ceiling vanished into darkness. Broken pillars leaned like giants defeated in battle, and tattered banners hung limp from the rafters. A dozen corpses lay scattered near the center, clansmen by their dress, slain recently. The ground was slick with half-frozen blood. "Looks like they fought among themselves," one of the knights murmured. "Or were hunted," said another. Robert knelt beside a body, his breath visible in the frigid air. The man's eyes were open, lips drawn back in terror. There was no wound upon him, no cut or arrow mark, yet he was dead. "The gods preserve us," whispered Maester Coleman. His heart burst. "Look, his face is blue." "Fear killed him," said Sir Lyn grimly. "Fear or something fouler." They moved deeper into the fortress. Each step echoed, swallowed by the blackness beyond their torchlight. Doors gaped open on either side, revealing empty chambers filled with shattered stone, rusted chains, and bones long since turned to dust. The deeper they went, the colder it grew. Then came the sound, a faint dragging far down one of the corridors. A man's voice, broken and hoarse. "Help! Help me!" Robert froze. The knights formed around him, shields lifted. "Stay close," Sir Lyn ordered. They followed the voice through the winding hall, down a narrow stairway slick with moisture. The air was foul here, heavy with the stench of decay. At the bottom lay a small dungeon, a pit of iron cages and forgotten suffering. Inside one of the cages, a figure huddled beneath a ragged cloak. The torchlight revealed a face pale as parchment, hair matted, eyes wild with fear. "Seven bless you," the man croaked. "You came. Gods, you came." Robert recognized the tattered sigil sewn into his tunic, the falcon of the veil, though stained and torn. "Who are you?" Robert asked. "Sir Miles Hunter," the man gasped. "They took us after the raid. Some escaped. Others died." He clutched at the bars. "Their chief is still here. Tormund Stone-Eye. He hunts the halls at night. He means to offer our blood to the mountain spirits." The knights exchanged uneasy looks. "Spirits," one muttered. "Old wives' tales." But even Sir Lyn's face darkened. "The clans believe the mountains are alive, that they can grant strength to those who feed them blood. I never cared to test the truth of it." They broke the lock and lifted the man from his cage. His body was thin as a reed, his skin cold to the touch. "He's fevered," Maester Coleman said. "We must leave this place before nightfall." Robert turned toward the stair. "Then we move now." But before they could take a step, a sound rolled through the fortress like thunder, a horn, deep and terrible, echoing from above. The torches flickered, dust drifted from the ceiling. Then came the answering cry, a chorus of rough voices shouting from the walls. "They're here," Sir Lyn said, drawing Lady Forlorn. "To arms!" The clan poured from the upper halls, howling their fury. They came like beasts, axes gleaming, torches burning blue in the half-dark. The Vale Knights formed their shield wall at the foot of the stairs. Steel met steel, the clangor deafening in the stone chamber. Robert stood behind them, his dagger drawn, watching as the narrow stair filled with blood. "Hold the line!" Sir Lyn roared. "For the Vale!" They fought like lions. Each time a clansman fell, two more leapt over his body. The air grew thick with smoke and the stench of iron. Robert could barely see through the haze. Then, through the chaos, a shape emerged, taller than the rest, broad-shouldered, his right eye covered by a shard of bone. In his hands he carried a war axe carved from black stone. "Tormund Stone-Eye," Sir Lyn hissed. The chieftain's voice rolled like gravel. "Falcon's whelp," he snarled, fixing Robert with a single eye. "Your kin think the sky protects them, but the mountain is older than the sky, and hungrier." Robert's blood ran cold, yet he did not look away. "You'll find no prey here," he said. Tormund laughed, a deep, savage sound. "We shall see." He charged, swinging the axe with the strength of 10 men. Sir Lyn met him with Lady Forlorn, the clash sending sparks across the stone. The two circled, trading blows that rang like thunder. "Get the boy out!" Sir Lyn shouted between strikes. But Robert did not move. He could not. The world had narrowed to the sight of that black axe rising and falling, to the echoing crash of steel and the rush of his own heartbeat. Then, in a single desperate moment, the chieftain feinted left and brought the axe down with crushing force. Sir Lyn parried, but the impact shattered his guard, the blade slicing a line across his shoulder. "Sir Lyn!" Robert cried. Tormund raised his weapon again, but before he could strike, Robert darted forward. He was small and quick, the dagger flashing in his hand. He drove it into the chieftain's side with all his strength. Tormund roared, spinning to strike him, but the blow went wide. Ser Lyn seized the opening, plunging Lady Forlorn through the man's chest. The chieftain's scream echoed through the fortress, long and terrible, before he fell to his knees and toppled lifeless upon the stone. Silence followed, broken only by the ragged breathing of men who had seen too much death. The remaining clansmen fled into the mountains, their courage shattered. Robert stood trembling beside Ser Lyn, blood spattered across his face. "You mad little falcon," the knight said hoarsely. "You saved my life again." Robert could barely speak. "He would have killed you." "He nearly did," Ser Lyn said, pressing a hand to his wound. "But we've taken his mountain from him. The Vale owes you more than it knows." They burned the bodies before they left, the flames casting long shadows across the crumbling walls. The fortress seemed almost to sigh as the smoke rose into the morning sky, its curse broken at last. When they rode from the Widow's Rise, Robert looked back only once. The black tower stood silent behind him, its windows glowing faintly in the light. He did not feel pride or fear then, only a strange stillness, as if the mountain itself acknowledged him. He had faced death twice and lived. And in the eyes of the men who followed, the frail boy of the Eyrie was gone. Only the Lord of the Vale rode now, his banner shining white against the dawn. When the Falcon Lord and his company returned from the Widow's Rise, the mists that had shrouded the Vale began to lift. Word of their victory spread faster than the wind, carried by messengers, merchants, and the tongues of small folk who loved a tale of courage. By the time Robert Arryn's banner was sighted from the bloody gate, the guards upon the walls were already shouting his name. "The Falcon of the Eyrie!" they cried. "The boy who slew the mountain chief!" It was strange to hear it. The name seemed to belong to someone else, some figure of song and story. Yet when Robert crossed beneath the great arch of the gate, the men bowed low and called him my lord, with a weight they had never used before. He saw it in their eyes, no longer pity, but reverence. Ser Lyn Corbray rode beside him, his shoulder bound in bandages, his face drawn but proud. "You've made the Vale remember what kind of blood runs in its lord's veins," he said. "Your father would have been proud." Robert looked toward the high peaks where the Eyrie shone faintly like a star. "I wish he had lived to see it." The road back to the castle wound long and high. They passed the narrow passes where the wind screamed like a living thing, and Robert remembered how frightened he had been the first time he'd ridden there, how he'd gripped the saddle until his hands cramped. Now he rode with calm, his gaze steady, his back straight. The mountain no longer felt like an enemy. It was part of him now, as much as the blood in his heart. By the time they reached the gates of the moon, the sun had set, torches burned along the courtyard, and Peter Baelish stood waiting upon the steps, wrapped in sable and silver. His smile was the same as ever, soft, knowing, dangerous. "My lord returns," he said smoothly, "and in triumph no less. The Vale sings of your bravery. I confess I did not expect to see you alive." Robert dismounted, his boots striking the stone. "You thought me too weak," he said, not as accusation, but simple truth. Baelish's smile deepened. "I thought you unready, but the mountain forges its own steel, does it not? Come, you must tell me of this victory. The lords of the Vale are eager to celebrate their young falcon." The boy followed him inside, Ser Lyn at his side. The hall blazed with firelight, tapestries rippling in the draught. Wine and roast meat were laid out, and the air smelled of smoke and honey. Yet beneath the warmth, Robert sensed something cold, something in Baelish's eyes that glittered like a blade hidden behind silk. As they sat, the older man poured him wine. "So," Baelish said lightly, "you rode against the clans and lived to tell of it. Tell me, my lord, what did you learn?" Robert met his gaze. "That fear is only a weapon when you let it rule you, and that courage is not born from strength, but from duty." "A fine answer," Baelish said, smiling thinly. "Your mother would have wept to hear it. She feared so for your safety, you know. I sometimes wonder what she'd think of you now, riding into battle, facing savages with steel and flame." "She would have told me to be brave," Robert said quietly. "Ah," Baelish murmured, sipping his wine. "Indeed, she would." The rest of the meal passed with laughter and stories, but Robert spoke little. His thoughts were on the men who had fallen, the knights buried beneath the mountain, the clansmen whose life he had taken. When the feast ended, he went alone to the terrace where the night air was cold and pure. The stars burned above the vale like scattered diamonds. "Do you think they watch us, Maester?" he asked as Coleman joined him. The old man followed his gaze. "Your mother and father? Aye, perhaps. The old gods have their ways, and the new their mercy." "I hope they see," Robert said. "I hope they know I tried to be worthy." "You are, my lord," the maester said gently. "But worthiness is not a thing that ends. It must be proven again and again." Robert nodded. "Then I will prove it." The following morning, the hall was filled with nobles from every corner of the Vale. Lords Belmore, Royce, and Redfort had come to pay homage. Even the proud Lady Anya Wainwood sent her sons bearing gifts. The council chamber thrummed with voices as Baelish called the gathering to order. "Lords of the Vale," he began, his tone smooth as velvet. "You come to honor the courage of your young lord, whose valor has brought peace once more to these mountains." The lords raised their cups, murmuring approval. Robert stood before them, his cloak of blue and white billowing in the draught. For a moment he felt their eyes upon him, expectant, measuring. He could almost hear the whispers that had followed him all his life. The sickly boy, the trembling child, the lord who cannot rule. He took a breath and spoke. "The Vale is not stone and sky," he said. "It is men and women who till the soil, who guard the passes, who live and die beneath these mountains. I have seen their courage. I have seen their fear, and I will not be a lord who hides while others bleed." The hall fell silent. His voice, though young, carried clear and strong. "From this day," he continued, "we will drive the clans from our borders. We will build watchfires along the high roads. The Vale will be safe again, not because others defend it, but because we do." A murmur of surprise rippled through the chamber. Lord Jan Royce rose, his face stern but approving. "Well spoken, my lord," he said. "The Arryn blood speaks true at last." Even Baelish smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "Such fire," he said softly. "Let us hope it does not burn too quickly." The council broke soon after, yet Robert could not shake the unease that crept through him. Petter Baelish's eyes followed him always, thoughtful and cold, as though measuring how far this new courage might go, and whether it could be bent or broken. That night, as torches guttered in the halls and snow began to fall beyond the gates, Robert stood once more upon the terrace of the Eyrie. Below him, the Vale stretched vast and silent, the moonlight turning it to silver. He thought of the widow's rise, of the mountain's whispering winds, of the men who had called him lord with their dying breaths. He was still frail of body, still beset by the tremors that came with the cold, but something inside him was unyielding now. He drew his cloak tighter and whispered into the night, "The falcon has flown." A gust of wind swept over the cliffs, cold and fierce, and it seemed to him an answer. Somewhere far below, the wolves howled, and the sound carried upward, echoing through the peaks like the call of destiny. For the first time in his life, Robert Arryn did not flinch from it. He turned toward the dark horizon where the world awaited, and knew that the boy he had been was gone. The mountains no longer guarded him. They challenged him, and he, at last, was ready to meet them. Winter's breath swept across the vale, cold and merciless. The high passes glittered beneath frost, and the sky hung low and heavy with snow. It was the season when the mountains fell silent, when even the clans retreated to their caves to wait out the cruel months ahead. Yet within the Eyrie, life stirred as it had not for many years. The boy lord had changed. Robert Arryn, once frail and uncertain, now walked the halls with quiet purpose. His shoulders were still narrow, his hands still delicate, but his gaze carried a new steadiness that drew whispers wherever he went. The servants no longer spoke of his fits, for he had not fallen ill in many moons. The maester claimed it was the mountain air that had hardened him. Others said it was something greater, a fire born in the forge of danger and fear. Whatever the truth, the Vale had begun to rally. At Robert's command, the watchtowers along the high road were rebuilt, their beacons restored to life. Messengers rode from the Eyrie to every stronghold, bearing the falcon's seal and the words, "For the Vale, for the sky, for the mountain." Knights drilled upon the snowy fields, their banners snapping in the wind, while small folk cheered to see them ride again beneath the Arryn blue. Yet not all were pleased by this stirring of old pride. One evening, in the great solar where the fire burned low, Petyr Baelish watched the young lord sign a decree with the careful precision of one twice his age. His face was a mask of courtesy, but behind his eyes something darker turned. "You grow into your duties quickly, my lord," he said, pouring wine with his usual soft grace. "Soon enough, you'll have no need of my guidance." Robert did not look up from his parchment. "You've guided the Vale well, Lord Petyr, but the time has come for me to learn to do so myself." "Ah," Baelish murmured, swirling the wine. "So you mean to rule, truly rule?" Robert's quill paused. "Was that not always my purpose?" "Of course," said Baelish smoothly. "Yet, rulership is a burden few are ready for. Power is like snow. It may look pure, but melted in your hands, and it runs red as blood." Robert met his gaze, calm and unflinching. "Then I will not melt it." Baelish's smile flickered, quick as a shadow. "As you say, my lord." When the man had gone, Robert sat for a long time before the fire. The warmth licked at his skin, but the chill in his thoughts was deep. He trusted Petyr no more than he trusted the mountain to be gentle. There was something in Baelish's manner, a patient waiting, like a spider watching its web. Robert knew that to rule, he must one day confront not only the enemies beyond the Vale, but the one within its walls. That night, the snow began to fall again, thick and silent. By morning, the world was white. Robert stood upon the terrace, the wind biting his face, and looked down upon the clouds that lay below the Eyrie like a sea. Sir Lyn Corbray joined him, his cloak dusted with frost, his expression as grim as ever. "The lords are restless," he said. "Baelish speaks to them in private, promises wealth, safety, peace. He says the mountain raids are done, that the boy lord's war is needless." Robert's jaw tightened. "And do they believe him?" "Some," Corbray admitted. "Many fear him more than they trust you." The boy turned to him, eyes sharp as glass. "Then we will give them reason to trust." He ordered a council of the Vale's houses to assemble within a fortnight. The summons went out to every lord and knight sworn to the Falcon. They came despite the snows, traveling by sled, by horse, even on foot, until the halls of the Arryn were filled once more with banners and voices. When the day of the gathering came, Robert sat upon the high seat of House Arryn, beneath the carved wings of the great falcon throne. His hands were steady upon the arms of the chair, though his heart thundered within his chest. He was still only a boy, but in that hall he could not afford to be one. The lords spoke long of trade, of harvest, of the mountain raids, but the true question hung unsaid, until at last Peter Baelish rose to speak. "My lords," he said in his silken tone, "we have endured much turmoil. Blood has been spilled and courage shown, by our young lord most of all. Yet we must ask ourselves, what has this war brought us? More graves, empty coffers, a hungry winter. The clans will vanish when spring returns, as they always have. Let us not spill more of our own blood chasing ghosts in the snow." A murmur of agreement rippled through the hall. Then Robert stood. The boy's voice was clear, cutting through the noise like a falcon's cry. "The clans are not ghosts. They are men who kill our people, who steal our children from their beds, who desecrate our valleys. You would have us wait for peace, my Lord Baelish, while others die for it." Baelish's smile did not waver. "And you would spend the Vale's strength on vengeance? A boy's pride makes for a costly war." Robert took a step forward. "This is not pride. It is duty. The Vale will not live in fear while I rule. We will cleanse our mountains, and every man here who swore to House Arryn will stand beside me, or forswear his oaths before all." The silence that followed was deep enough to hear the crackle of the fire. It was Lord Jan Royce who spoke first. "The Arryn blood speaks true," he said, his voice low but sure. "I will ride for the Vale." One by one, others followed. Redfort, Belmore, Linderley, and finally even the younger Waynwoods. The hall filled with the sound of voices swearing fealty anew. Baelish stood still as stone, his smile frozen, his eyes unreadable. When it was done, Robert turned to him. "You said the snow runs red when it melts. Then let the mountain drink its fill, and let the Vale stand clean once more." That night, torches burned upon the Arryn's towers, bright against the falling snow. Messengers rode out again into the passes, bearing orders for war. The falcon banners were unfurled, their white wings gleaming in the torchlight. Robert watched them from the highest balcony, his breath misting in the air. Below him, the Vale seemed endless, cold, vast, and waiting. "Your father faced rebellion," Maester Coleman said softly beside him. "Your mother faced betrayal. You face both. Are you ready, my lord?" Robert's gaze did not leave the horizon. "A falcon does not wait for the wind," he said. "He flies against it." And as the wind rose, sweeping the snow from the peaks, the young lord of the Arryn felt no fear, only the weight of the crown he had been born to bear, and the cold fire of purpose burning in his heart. The Vale would rise again, and when it did, its enemies, whether in shadowed mountain caves or in the velvet halls of its own keep, would learn that even a frail boy could become a storm. The snows of late winter had hardened to ice by the time the banners of the Vale began their march. The white falcon of House Arryn flew high above 1,000 lances, catching the pale light of the morning sun. Knights in polished mail rode beside grim-faced men-at-arms, their armor dull from use, their eyes fixed upon the mountain roads ahead. The air rang with the creak of leather, the jangle of bridles, and the slow, steady beat of hooves upon frozen stone. Robert Arryn rode at the head of them all, He wore no crown, only a simple circlet of silver, cold and unadorned. His cloak, white as the snow beneath, whipped about him in the wind. To any who looked upon him that morning, he seemed older than his years, carved by the mountain's hand. The boy who had once trembled in fear was gone. The Lord of the Eyrie rode in his place. The army wound its way up the high road that snaked along the cliffs. Below them, the vale lay quiet, veiled in mist. Above, the peaks rose jagged and cruel, the domain of hawks and ghosts. It was there, among the high crags, that the clans still lingered, the remnants of Stone Eye's followers, the burned men, the Moon Brothers, all driven into hiding after the fall of the Widow's Rise. Yet Robert knew they would not remain hidden for long. Beside him rode Sir Lyn Corbray, his black hair tied back, his famed blade Lady Forlorn resting across his saddle. "They will come for you," he said. "You struck them deeper than you know. The clans bleed, and wounded beasts are the most dangerous." Robert nodded. "Then let them come. I'll meet them as a Lord of the Vale should." Sir Lyn's eyes softened for a moment. "Your father would have said the same." They rode on until the sun began to sink behind the peaks. The company made camp in a narrow valley where a stream cut through the snow like a silver vein. Fires were lit, tents raised, and the scent of smoke and meat filled the air. Robert walked among the men as they ate, listening to their laughter, their quiet songs. He had once been afraid of their gaze, of the way knights and soldiers saw only his weakness. Now, when they looked upon him, he saw pride. As night fell, he withdrew to a rise overlooking the camp. The moon hung above, a pale coin, and the stars burned bright against the black. The wind keened through the rocks, carrying whispers that might have been the voices of the dead. "You hear them too," said a voice behind him. Robert turned to see Maester Coleman, his gray robes heavy with frost. "The mountain?" The Maester nodded. "Old songs say it remembers, that it knows every drop of blood spilled upon its stones." "Then it knows ours well," Robert said softly. "It has taken much from the Vale." "And yet it gives back," said Coleman. "It made you." The boy lord looked out into the endless dark. "Perhaps. But what if it takes again?" The master gave a weary smile. "Then you'll endure, as all Arryns have." At dawn, they climbed higher still, following the trail that wound toward the Teeth, the twin peaks that guarded the Vale's northern border. The wind grew harsher, and snow swirled in restless clouds. It was there, amidst the sharp ridges and hidden passes, that the clans struck. The first cry came from the vanguard. A horn sounded, low and mournful, and then the mountains erupted with life. Arrows fell from the heights like sleet. Stones tumbled from ledges. From every shadow, wild men poured forth, howling their war cries. "Shields!" Sir Lyn bellowed. "Form ranks! Protect the Lord!" Robert drew his sword. It was not the blade of a great warrior, but he held it firm. The air was thick with snow and smoke as the clans descended, their faces painted with ash, their weapons crude but deadly. The clash was chaos. Spears shattered, horses screamed, men fell and rose again. Robert rode among his knights, his voice cutting through the storm. "Hold the line, for the Vale!" The cry spread like fire. The Vale knights, outnumbered though they were, held their ground with stubborn fury. The narrow pass became a slaughter. Through the din, Robert saw a figure upon the ridge, a woman, tall and gaunt, her hair woven with bones. She raised a horn carved from a mountain goat's skull and blew a note that chilled his blood. Around her, the clans rallied, their fury renewed. "That's their new chieftain!" Sir Lyn shouted over the noise. "The Widow of the Rise! Stone Eye's mate!" The woman's voice rose above the wind, shrieking words in the old tongue. Arrows rained down once more. Men fell. Robert felt his horse lurch beneath him and threw himself clear as the beast collapsed. The snow burned cold against his face as he scrambled to his feet. Sir Lyn was beside him, his blade a blur of silver. "To the ridge!" he shouted. "Cut off the horn!" Robert followed, climbing the treacherous slope as the battle raged below. His breath came in ragged bursts. Twice he slipped, his fingers bleeding where they caught the stone, but he did not stop. At last, they reached the crest. The widow stood before them, her eyes wild, her cloak of furs whipping in the wind. In one hand, she held the horn, in the other, a jagged spear. "So the boy comes again," she hissed. "The falcon who slays chiefs. Come then, Sky Child. Let us see if you can kill the mountain's bride." She struck first, her spear flashing toward his chest. He twisted aside, the blow grazing his shoulder. Pain flared, but he ignored it. Sir Lyn moved to flank her, his sword raised, but she met him with a shriek and drove him back with savage strength. Robert lunged. His blade met her spear, sparks flying as iron kissed iron. The widow's strength was terrible, but her fury made her reckless. When she turned to strike at Sir Lyn again, Robert moved. He thrust forward, the steel sinking deep into her side. For a heartbeat, she stared at him, lips parted in disbelief. Then she laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "You think you've won, little lord? The mountain remembers." She fell without another word. The battle below faltered as her followers saw her body. Their cries turned to chaos, and within moments, they were fleeing into the snow. Sir Lyn staggered to Robert's side, his armor dented, his breath steaming. "You've done it again," he said hoarsely. "The clans will break now, their spirits gone." Robert looked down at his sword, slick with blood that steamed in the cold. "Then let them remember this day," he said. "Let them remember the Vale's strength." By nightfall, the fires of the Vale army burned upon the ridge, their glow a beacon across the peaks. The wounded were tended, the dead laid in neat rows. Maester Coleman bound Robert's arm with shaking hands, muttering prayers beneath his breath. "You should rest, my lord," he said. "I will," Robert murmured, though he did not move. He stood at the edge of the camp, gazing down at the dark valley where the last echoes of battle had died. The wind howled around him, carrying voices that only he could hear, the whispers of the mountain, old and cold. "You've taken what was owed," it seemed to say. "Now you are one of us." Robert closed his eyes. He felt no triumph, no joy, only the weight of the silence, and the certainty that he could never go back to the boy who once feared the wind. He had become part of the mountain's story now, its blood and its memory. And though snow would cover the dead by morning, the Vale would remember. The day the falcon rose upon the teeth and the mountain bowed its head, spring crept into the Vale slowly, shy and uncertain, as if afraid to wake the mountains from their long slumber. Snow still clung to the high passes, though in the valleys below, green shoots had begun to pierce the frost. The rivers ran swollen and wild with meltwater, whispering of life's return. Yet for all the land's renewal, a quiet unease lingered in the hearts of men. The mountain clans were broken, but not gone. The burned men had scattered, the Moon Brothers vanished into the northern caves, and the remnants of the Stone Eye's followers still haunted the high trails, striking at merchants and shepherds before melting into the mist. Each raid, though small, was a scar that refused to heal. In the Eyrie, Robert Arryn ruled from the Falcon Throne, and the weight of his victories pressed heavier with each passing moon. He had known triumph and glory, but glory was a fickle companion. It fed a man's pride while hollowing his sleep. "Another skirmish near the Red Fork, my lord," said Maester Coleman one morning as he unrolled a parchment. "2 dead, 3 missing. The clans take to the heights again." Robert's hand tightened upon the arm of his chair. "And the watchfires?" "Lit and answered," said the Maester, "but the mountains hide them too well. They strike and vanish." The young lord stood, pacing before the tall windows. The Eyrie shone with cruel beauty around him, its marble walls aglow with morning light, its high towers piercing the sky. Once he had felt safe within those walls, untouched by the world below. Now he felt only caged. "I will not let them fester," he said. "We will hunt them down, root and bone. Every clan that defies the veil will fall." Coleman hesitated. "My lord, you fought bravely, but the men grow weary. You have given them honor and blood enough for 1 winter. The veil needs peace." "Peace?" Robert turned sharply. "Peace is bought with fear. So long as the clans breathe, there is no peace." The Maester's eyes were gentle, sorrowful. "You sound like your mother when she spoke of the Lannisters." Robert froze. "Do not compare me to her," he said, his voice low. "She ruled with fear, not strength." Coleman bowed his head. "Forgive me, my lord. I only mean that vengeance can become a chain heavier than duty." Robert said nothing more. When the Maester left, he stood before the great window for a long while, staring down at the clouds. Below, the veil lay hidden beneath its silver shroud, a kingdom of mist and silence. He had won the respect of his knights, the loyalty of his lords, and the fear of his enemies, but not yet his own peace. Somewhere within, the boy who once trembled still whispered doubts, and he hated that voice most of all. Days later, word reached him that Sir Lyn Corbray had returned from patrol. The knight entered the hall at dusk, his armor dented, his cloak torn and stained with mud. "My lord," he said, kneeling, "we found the burned men's new camp. They've taken to the northern cliffs above Runestone, 200 strong, maybe more. They gather under a new leader." Robert descended the dais. "Another chief?" "Aye," said Sir Lyn. "They call him the Red Crow. A madman, by all accounts. He claims the mountain speaks through him, that it demands the blood of the Falcon Lord." Robert's face was pale in the torchlight. "Then he shall have my answer. Ready the riders. We march at dawn." Sir Lyn frowned. "My lord, the men—" "I said at dawn." Robert cut him off. There was iron in his tone, and Sir Lyn bowed his head. "As you command." That night, Robert walked the halls alone. The moonlight fell across the cold stone floors, tracing the falcon sigil beneath his feet. He paused before a great portrait. His father, John Arryn, painted before the war. The Lord of the Eyrie looked out from the canvas with calm, noble eyes. "You ruled with honor," Robert whispered. "You sought peace through wisdom, but the world you knew is gone. These mountains answer only to strength." His reflection shimmered faintly in the glass of the frame, a thinner, younger face, harder around the eyes. At dawn, the falcon banners rose once more. The march to Runestone was swift but cruel. The spring thaw had turned the mountain roads to rivers of mud, and more than once men slipped to their deaths upon the narrow paths. Yet Robert rode at their head, tireless, his cloak snapping in the wind. When they reached the northern cliffs, the enemy was waiting. The Red Crow's warriors stood upon the ridges, their armor crude, their bodies daubed in ash and blood. At their center stood the chieftain himself, a towering figure clad in crow feathers and bone, His eyes gleamed with feverish light, his mouth twisted into a smile that was all teeth. He raised his arms to the sky and shouted words in the old tongue. The echo carried down the valley like thunder. Sir Lyn spat. "Madmen. Mad or not," Robert said, "they will die screaming." The Vale army advanced. Arrows darkened the sky, spears clashed against shields. The sound of war rolled through the mountains like a storm. Robert fought among his knights, his sword flashing in the half-light. He was no master of the blade, yet his courage lent him strength. Twice he was thrown from his horse. Twice he rose again. The red crow came down from the ridge like a shadow. His war cry split the air as he struck. The force of his blow drove Robert to his knees, sparks flying where steel met steel. The chieftain's laughter was wild, his strength inhuman. "Falcon Lord!" he roared. "The mountain calls your name!" Robert met his fury with calm. "Then let it hear mine." He feinted left, then lunged, driving his blade into the red crow's chest. The man staggered, choking on his own scream, yet before he fell, he seized Robert by the throat. "You cannot kill what the mountain made," he rasped. Then he died, and with him, the courage of his men. The clans fled into the wilds, their cries swallowed by wind and snow. When it was done, Sir Lyn found Robert sitting upon a rock, his sword still in hand, blood spattered across his face. "It's over," the knight said. Robert looked out across the valley, where the fires burned and the dead lay still. "No," he said softly. "It never is." They buried the fallen where they lay, beneath cairns of stone. The wind keened through the passes, carrying the scent of smoke and iron. That night, as the campfires burned low, Robert sat beside the maester. His hands were bandaged, his voice hoarse. "Was it worth it?" he asked quietly. "All this blood?" Maester Coleman stirred the fire with a stick. "Wars are never worth their price, my lord, but peace demands it be paid." Robert nodded slowly. The flames danced before him, their light flickering in his eyes. When dawn came again, he mounted his horse and turned south toward the Arry. The wind caught his cloak, and for a moment it seemed as though wings spread wide behind him. The falcon was returning to his nest, older, wiser, and haunted, but alive. And in the deep places of the mountains, where no sun reached, the stones whispered his name. Not the frail boy of the Arry, but the Lord of the Vale. The one who had made the mountains remember their master. The journey back to the Arry was long, and though the banners of the Vale fluttered proudly in the cold wind, the road felt quieter than before. Victory had been won, yet triumph had soured upon Robert Arryn's tongue. Too many men had been left buried beneath cairns of snow. Each stone laid upon those graves weighed upon him like another piece of armor, heavy and unrelenting. The falcon banners glimmered silver in the dawn light, but beneath their beauty was exhaustion. The men rode in silence through valleys that still smelled of smoke and blood. The mountain wind keened around them, carrying the distant cry of crows, the true heralds of war's end. When they reached the foothills, Sir Lyn Corbray drew his horse alongside Robert's. The knight looked older than he had weeks ago, his hair streaked with frost, his left arm still bound from an arrow wound. "The Red Crow is dead," Sir Lyn said. "The clans are broken. You have done what no Arryn before you could." Robert's gaze stayed on the horizon, and yet they will come again. The mountains breed hunger and hate as the fields breed grain. Sir Lyn studied him a moment, then smiled faintly. "You sound like your father now." "I never knew him well enough to sound like him," Robert said. "But I suppose the Vale remembers." When at last they reached the gates of the moon, the fortress came alive with sound, Horns, bells, shouts of joy. Word of their victory had outrun them. The courtyards filled with soldiers, small folk, and servants, all cheering their lord's return. Flowers were strewn across the steps, their pale petals crushed beneath hooves and boots. Peter Baelish was waiting upon the marble stair, his cloak of gray and silver catching the light. He bowed deeply as Robert dismounted. "My brave young lord," he said smoothly. "The Vale sings your name once more. Even the bards of Gulltown could not have written a finer tale." Robert looked at him coolly. "It was no tale. Men died for this victory." Baelish's smile did not falter, as men always do when greatness is born. Sir Lynn stepped forward, his tone edged with disdain. "Greatness? Call it what you will, but it was blood and ice that won us the day, not songs." "Ah, Sir Lynn," Baelish replied, his voice soft as silk. "You mistake me. Songs keep men loyal long after their swords have rusted, and our lord will need both, steel and story, if he means to hold what he's claimed." Robert brushed past him and climbed the stair. "Then let the songs wait. I've no ear for them now." In truth, the young lord's thoughts were far from triumph. When he entered the great hall of the Eyrie once more, he felt the chill of its silence. The torches burned bright, yet the place seemed emptier somehow. The high seat of his house loomed before him, its wings carved from pale stone. He hesitated a moment before sitting, as though uncertain whether the boy he once was deserved it. Master Coleman entered quietly behind him. "The men are to be dismissed to their homes, my lord. The Vale will feast tonight in your honor." "Feast," Robert murmured. "Let them feast. They've earned it." "And you?" the Maester asked. "Will you not join them?" Robert looked to the tall window where the moonlight streamed through. "No, I think I've had my fill of songs and wine. I'll take the night for thought." The Maester bowed and withdrew, leaving him alone with the whisper of wind through the high chambers. For a long while, Robert sat in silence. Then he rose and crossed to the great terrace that overlooked the Vale. The night was clear, the air biting cold, and the stars stretched vast above the mountains. Far below, he could see the flicker of fires where the men celebrated their lord's return. He watched them long, his thoughts drifting between pride and sorrow. "You would not know me now, mother," he whispered to the sky. "But I think, at last, I know myself." The wind stirred, cold fingers brushing his hair. He thought he heard her voice there, soft, distant, and half-remembered, "My sweet Robin." It made him smile, though tears pricked at his eyes. Behind him, a shadow moved in the doorway. Peter Baelish stepped out, his face lit by the moon. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said. "The Vale at night. So peaceful one might forget it was ever soaked in blood." Robert did not turn. "You never forget. You simply grow used to the sight." Baelish chuckled softly. "A hard lesson, and well learned. You've changed, my lord. The frightened child who clung to his mother's skirts has become a man that even the mountains bow to." Robert glanced at him over his shoulder. "Did you think me forever your puppet?" Baelish raised an eyebrow, his smile faint and dangerous. "A puppet? No. I saw what you might become the day I first took your hand in the Eyrie. You only needed the right stage and the right play." The words chilled Robert more than the mountain wind. "You speak as if you shaped me." Baelish's eyes gleamed. "Perhaps I only loosened the wings. The rest was your doing. But take care, my lord. A falcon that flies too high risks the fall." "I would rather fall than be caged," Robert said. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Baelish inclined his head in mock respect. "Then may your wings never fail you." He turned and vanished into the dark corridor, his footsteps fading like whispers. Robert remained where he was, staring into the night. The veil stretched before him, endless, proud and perilous. He knew Baelish's words for what they were, a warning wrapped in praise, a game played by a man who never left anything to chance. But Robert had faced worse dangers in the mountains. He had faced his own fear, and won. "I will not be your peace," he murmured. "Not yours, nor anyone's." The wind rose then, swirling around him, tugging at his cloak. The moon gleamed upon the falcon brooch at his shoulder, and for a moment he fancied the mountain answered him with its low, rolling sigh. He turned back toward the hall. Tomorrow he would send riders to every lord of the Vale, to call a council and speak of new laws, fairer tithes, safer roads, justice for the small folk who had borne the weight of war. His father's dream, reborn in the son who had never known peace. As he crossed the chamber, the light of dawn began to edge the windows with gold. The falcon of Arryn soared high upon the glass, and when the sun touched it, it seemed to move, to spread its wings and take flight into the morning. Robert paused beneath it and smiled faintly. "Fly then," he whispered. "Fly and remember me." The day was coming, and with it, the shaping of a new Vale, one not of fear or frailty, but of resolve and hope. And though he could not yet know what storms would rise beyond the mountains, the young lord stood unflinching before them. The falcon had learned to fly. Spring deepened into summer, and the Vale of Arryn awoke from its long sleep. The snows melted from the high peaks, sending torrents of crystal water rushing down through the gullies and into the green valleys below. Crops sprouted in the terraced fields, and the shepherds returned to the lower slopes where the grass was rich. The land breathed again, yet peace, true peace, remained as fragile as ice upon the mountain streams. Robert Arryn, Lord of the Eyrie, had become a name spoken with reverence throughout the Vale. His banners had broken the clans, his courage had bound the lords, and his words had kindled hope among the small folk. Still, he slept little. His nights were filled with restless dreams, dreams of blood, of snow, of wind screaming through dark valleys. In the daylight, he turned those dreams into purpose. He gathered the Vale's finest minds, maesters, knights, and lords, to rebuild what war had torn apart. Roads were cleared, villages fortified, and the watchfires rekindled across every ridge. Messengers rode from the Eyrie each dawn, bearing orders in the falcon seal. The Vale began to hum with work again, a land mending its own wounds. But shadows lengthened as swiftly as they had lifted. One evening, as the last light of sunset burned upon the high towers, Sir Lyn Corbray entered the Lord's solar, his face grim. "There's trouble in the west," he said. "At Iron Oaks. Lord Belmore's bannermen claim bandits raid the trade road again. Not clansmen this time. These wear steel, not furs." Robert looked up from his parchment. "Mercenaries? So they say, but they move with purpose. Someone's paying them." "Baelish," Robert said softly. Sir Lyn frowned. "You have proof?" "None," Robert replied, "but I know his ways. When war ends, he breeds whispers. When peace threatens, he breeds chaos." The knight crossed his arms. "He still holds the lordship of the fingers and the Vale's purse strings. If he stirs rebellion, he'll have gold enough to buy blades." "Then we'll remind him," said Robert, "that the Vale has no master but its lord." 2 days later, Robert rode for Iron Oaks with a small retinue. The air was sweet with pine, the road winding through forests thick with songbirds and mist. The company traveled swift and light, for he wished to see with his own eyes what threat had taken root in his land. When they reached Iron Oaks, they found the truth worse than rumor. The fields were trampled, the watchtower burned. Small folk huddled within the keep's courtyard, their faces hollow. Lord Belmore greeted them with shame written plain upon his weathered face. "They came by night," he said. 50 or more. Took our grain, our silver, our young men for ransom. They bore no sigil, but they were no wild men. They fought like trained soldiers. Robert walked among the wreckage, his boots crunching upon blackened straw. "Did they speak?" "Only once," said Belmore. "They said the falcon's wings would soon be clipped." Sir Lynn spat. "Baelish's tongue, if ever I've heard it." Robert said nothing. His eyes were cold and distant. "How many days since they left?" 4, maybe 5, Belmore said. "They rode east toward the Fingers." Robert turned to his men. "We follow. If they flee to Baelish, let him answer for them." The pursuit carried them across wild country, through pine forests and cold rivers, over windswept moors where the gulls cried above the cliffs. The road thinned as they neared the sea, where the Fingers stretched like long white bones into the water. On the 5th night, they found their quarry. A band of men camped among the dunes, their fires dim, their laughter careless. Their armor was mismatched, but their discipline was clear. Mercenaries indeed. Robert watched from the rise above, the sea wind tugging at his cloak. "We strike now," he said. "No warning. Let the storm fall upon them." The Vale Knights moved like shadows, slipping down through the tall grass. When they struck, it was swift and merciless. Steel flashed, cries rang out, and within moments the camp was a ruin of fire and blood. Robert himself took a man alive, a scarred soldier who tried to flee toward the shore. Sir Lynn disarmed him with a blow of his pommel and dragged him before his lord. "Who sent you?" Robert demanded. The man spat blood. "Gold," he said. "We fight for gold." "Whose gold?" The man hesitated. Then, with a smirk that revealed a missing tooth, he said, "The Lord of the Vale's own. From Gulltown, from Baelish." Sir Lynn drew his sword, but Robert raised a hand. "No, let him live. He will tell his story to the lords." By the time they returned to the Eyrie, the storm had already broken. Word had spread through the Vale that Baelish had armed sellswords against his own liege. The lords whispered in fury. Baelish came before the council calm as ever, his silver pin gleaming, his tone soft as silk. "My lord," he said, "I am but your loyal servant. These accusations wound me deeply. I have given my life to the Vale." Robert regarded him in silence, his eyes unreadable. Then he said, "Your loyalty buys mercenaries with my gold and burns my fields?" Baelish's smile faltered only for a heartbeat. "Surely my lord does not believe the word of some broken thief." "I believe the evidence of my own men," Robert said. "And I have heard enough of your counsel. You are stripped of your title as Lord Paramount. You will depart for the Fingers by dawn and take no coin of the Vale with you." A murmur ran through the hall. Baelish bowed low, his face hidden. "As my lord commands," he said. When he lifted his eyes again, there was no submission in them, only the cold gleam of a man who played a long game. "You are your father's son indeed," he said. "I pray the mountain keeps you." As he left the hall, Robert felt a strange mix of triumph and dread. For the first time, he had stood openly against the man who had ruled his life from the shadows. But he knew Peter Baelish did not yield easily. That night, Robert stood upon the high balcony, watching the torches of Baelish's retinue descend the winding road. The stars glittered above, cold and distant. Sir Lin joined him, silent for a long while before speaking. "He'll not forgive this." "I do not ask his forgiveness," Robert said. "Only his absence." "And if he returns?" Robert's hand tightened upon the stone rail. "Then he'll find the veil ready." The wind howled through the peaks, carrying the faint cry of a hawk far above. Robert lifted his gaze, following it until it vanished into the stars. He felt no fear. The boy who once trembled in the Ares halls had been tempered by snow and blood, by battle and betrayal. He had faced the mountain, the clans, and the serpent who whispered in his mother's ear. Now he faced the greater trial of rule itself, the quiet war of men's hearts. As dawn crept over the vale, the falcon of Arryn spread its wings across the morning sky, and the Lord of the Eyrie stood unbowed beneath it. Whatever storms might come, he knew this truth. The mountain remembers, but the falcon endures. Summer ripened and waned, and the Vale of Arryn stood at peace for the first time in many years. The mountain passes were safe, the watchtowers burned bright each night, and the high roads echoed not with the cries of raiders, but with the wheels of trade. From Gulltown to the Bloody Gate, the banners of the falcon flew unhindered, their white wings shining against the blue of the sky. Yet peace, as all lords learn, is a fragile thing. Robert Arryn, now in his 16th year, ruled from the Eyrie with a steadiness that few would have believed of him as a child. The tremors that had once plagued his body came seldom, and though his master still pressed milk of the poppy upon him at times, Robert often waved it away. His strength was his own now, born not of medicine or fear, but of will. Still, the years of strain had marked him. His face had sharpened, his eyes carried the calm of a man who had looked upon death and learned its silence. In the summer's waning days, word came that Peter Baelish had vanished from the Fingers. His ship had been sighted off the coast, sailing east toward the narrow sea, and thereafter, nothing. Some claimed he fled to Braavos. Others whispered that he had drowned in a storm. Robert neither believed nor dismissed these tales. Men like Baelish did not vanish. They waited. But for a time, the Vale prospered. He began reforms that his father had once dreamed of. Justices for the small folk, taxes lightened on the mountain villages, a rebuilding of the Falcon Guard. The lords grumbled, as lords will, yet none dared speak openly against him. For Robert Arryn, once mocked as the trembling boy of the Eyrie, now commanded with the quiet authority of one who had earned his rule by blood and peril. Sir Lin Corbray remained ever at his side, his sworn sword, his shadow, his brother in all but name. Yet even Lin, bold as steel, spoke less now. The years had tempered him too, and though he still rode to battle drills with the same fierce joy, there was a heaviness in him, a knowledge that no peace lasted forever. One evening, as dusk bled purple across the peaks, Robert and Sir Lin stood upon the high terrace of the Eyrie, gazing across the vale. Clouds drifted below them, glowing faintly in the fading light. "You've given them a new age," said Sir Lin. "The clans are broken, the lords united. The Vale hasn't seen such peace since your grandsire's time." Robert's gaze was fixed upon the horizon. Peace is never more than borrowed time. Somewhere beyond those peaks, men sharpen their swords. Sir Lin chuckled low. "You sound like a maester." "Perhaps I've been listening," Robert replied. Then, quieter, "Do you ever wonder if this—" He gestured toward the mountains, the clouds, the whole vast silence. "Will ever be enough?" The knight looked at him sidelong. "Enough?" "To rule," said Robert, "to be remembered." Sir Lin's answer came slow. The ones who try to be remembered seldom are. Do your duty well, and let the bards lie as they will." Robert smiled faintly. "A simple creed. You make it sound easy." "It isn't," Sir Lyn said, his hand resting upon the hilt of Lady Forlorn, "but it's all any man can do." The wind stirred then, whispering down from the high peaks. It carried with it a sound faint and far, a horn, low and mournful. The two men turned sharply. "From the east road," said Sir Lyn. "That's no signal for trade." Within moments, messengers came galloping through the upper gates. Their armor was splattered with mud, their eyes wild with fear. "Raiders!" one cried. "Not the clans, the Black Eyrie men from across the sea. They bear the sigil of a mockingbird." Robert's heart went still. "Baelish," he whispered. By nightfall, the Vale was awake once more to the sound of war. The invaders had struck swift and hard, foreign mercenaries led by captains in Baelish's pay, landing upon the coast near Runestone and sweeping inland under cover of fog. Villages burned, farms were taken for spoil. They moved like a serpent through the lowlands, their goal clear as ice, to climb the mountain and take the Eyrie itself. Robert summoned his banners. The beacons along the passes were lit once more, and riders flew from keep to keep. Within 2 days, every stronghold of the Vale stood armed and ready. "They come for you, my lord," said Maester Coleman gravely. "They will not stop until they stand where your father once sat." "Then they will die beneath those same stones," Robert answered. The first battle met them in the valley of the Coldwater Burn. The enemy came in gleaming rows, men of the free cities, clad in lacquered mail, their standards black and silver. The Vale Knights faced them with shields of blue and white, the falcon spreading its wings beneath a sky thick with storm. The clash was terrible. Rain poured down as steel met steel. The ground turned to mud and blood. Robert rode at the center, his voice carrying above the din. "For the Vale!" he cried, and his men roared in answer. Sir Lyn fought beside him, his blade singing through the rain. "They'll break!" he shouted. "One more push!" And break they did. The mercenaries fled, their captains cut down or taken. When the storm cleared, the valley lay strewn with the dead. Robert dismounted and walked among them, his boots sinking into the sodden earth. Among the fallen, he found a man whose armor bore the mockingbird in enamel. The sigil was cracked but clear. He knelt and turned the body over. The man was young, perhaps no older than Robert himself, his eyes open to the darkening sky. Around his neck hung a thin chain of silver, and upon it a letter sealed in wax. Robert broke the seal. It bore no name, only words written in Baelish's careful hand. "The falcon may fly, but every bird must one day land. Remember, sweet lord, those who rise highest have the furthest to fall." Robert stood for a long time in the rain, the parchment dissolving in his grasp. When at last he looked up, Sir Lyn was beside him. "Is it him?" the knight asked. Robert's voice was quiet. "A message and a promise." Sir Lyn's hand rested upon his shoulder. "Then let him come again. We'll be ready." Robert nodded, though his eyes were distant. "He already has," he murmured. "Every battle, every shadow, this is his doing still. But I will not fall, not while the mountain stands." When they returned to the Eyrie, the bells told victory, yet Robert found little joy in them. He knew Baelish was alive, somewhere beyond the sea, spinning his webs anew. There would be more storms, more battles yet to come. But for now, the Vale stood. That night, he climbed alone to the moon door. The wind howled through the open chamber, cold and wild. Below him lay the long drop into darkness, the endless sea of cloud. He looked down without fear. "I am no falcon in a cage," he said softly. "You taught me fear, Baelish, You and the mountain both, but fear made me strong, and I am not yours." The wind rose, fierce and sharp, tearing at his cloak. He stood unmoving, a lone figure framed against the storm. Then he turned and left the door behind him, closing it with a sound like thunder. In the hall below, the firelight flickered upon the carved wings of the Arryn falcon. Its eyes caught the glow, and for an instant, it seemed alive, watchful, waiting, unyielding. The boy who had once clung to his mother's skirts was gone. The frail child who feared the mountain had become the man who ruled it. And though darkness gathered beyond the veil, Robert Arryn stood firm, a lord of stone and sky, his courage carved by wind and forged in blood. The mountain would remember his